Hey everyone, welcome back to Create Your Character. I'm Katie Martin. This episode, I'll show you how to make your own Luma Plushie to help you explore the galaxy. Luckily, you won't have to stomp any Goombas or challenge Bowser to a duel for this project. Stick around and keep watching if you want to make your own little star-shaped friend. So the first thing that I'm going to do is make my pattern out of newspaper. I'm going to do this just by looking at a reference picture and using a Sharpie marker to draw out the design. I'm doing this on a folded piece of newspaper so I can use the same kind of shape at the front and the back because there's only going to be a small difference between the two. So I figured this would be a good method of making my pattern. Now I'm using an X-Acto knife to cut out my pattern. And I grab another piece of newspaper to make the pattern for the eye. Now I pin my pattern to the fabric that I'm going to be using, and I'm just going to cut out the fabric. I chose this really light purple color, and it's also really fuzzy, but you can use whatever fabric you want. It's kind of hard to see the color with this lighting, but at the end you'll get a better picture of what it looks like. Now I'm cutting the eye out of some really dark purple felt. I'm using felt because it doesn't need hemmed, and it won't fray. Now I'm just lining up where I want the eyes and making sure that they're going to be placed correctly, and then I'm just going to pin them to the fabric. And now I'm sewing the eyes to the fabric. After I attach the eyes, I'm going to sew the seam down the middle of the Luma. I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam, but depending on how big or small you want your seam, it's really up to you. Just keep that in mind whenever you draw your pattern. Now I'm going to sew the seam down the back. Once that's done, I'm going to sew around all the edges. I'm also using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this as well. Whenever I start and stop my seams, I'm also locking in the stitch by going backwards and then forwards again. That's just a safety measure so the thread doesn't start unwinding or coming undone. This top part was a little tricky because it's a really small area to sew around, so I just took it slow and I was able to get it done. I also like to use quilting clips rather than pins, just because I find myself stabbing myself a lot whenever I use pins, so I've made the switch over to quilting clips. I'm going to leave a hole open at the end so I can turn it inside out and then I start stuffing. I'm making sure that I push stuffing into all the little tips of the stars, so those areas are nice and floofy too. I'm also kind of making sure that I kind of tear up the stuffing as I put it in there, so it's really floofy because it was stuffed in a bag for a long time, and I want to make sure it's nice and squishy and huggable. I'm kind of floofing it out as I go along to make sure that the stuffing isn't awkwardly placed. Now it's time to stitch up the hole on the bottom. I'm going to use an invisible stitch, and what this means is I'm just going to sew along the two inside flaps that are kind of folded inwards. I'm doing this so you won't be able to see the stitching whenever it's done. Even though I don't think you'd be able to see it if I just didn't even try to do the invisible stitch, because the color of the thread is like the same color as the fabric, and also I think the fuzz, the floof of the fabric, does a really good job at hiding the stitching. And just like that, my Luma plushie is all finished. I hope this tutorial was useful on showing you how to make your own little Luma. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to tweet me at ZTV Goofing Off with the hashtag #CreateYourCharacter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.